So, Olof, thank you very much to be with us in CCA Radio.
No, of course, looking forward to it.
These days in Cartagena, Ambicom is happening, and you will be in Ambicom, in this International Congress for Technology Information. So I would like to ask you, what's the importance of creativity and design in a company?
In general, you mean?
Yeah, in general terms.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the most important aspect of modern companies, actually. Design and therefore understanding humans and their needs, their expectations and their beliefs is super important. And if you look at what will be the important jobs of the future, the important careers and so on, it's all pointing to creativity. So the things that traditionally a lot of people spend time on, logical work, accounting, things like that, can increasingly be done by computers. So in the past, industrial revolution, the machines started to outperform humans in terms of muscle work, but now increasingly they're outperforming humans in terms of cognitive work. But what we're still unable to replicate is the ability for humans to take creative leaps, come up with great ideas, innovate in collaborative cross-functional settings. So for that reason, both design itself, which is about understanding people and then shaping solutions that meet people's needs, and creativity, i.e. the ability to innovate, the ability to work across traditional boundaries and come up with new solutions or different solutions, are super important in the world, in industries, and therefore in companies.
Okay, perfect. Olof, could we ask you to turn on your camera for the interview?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, thank you quite much.
I'm actually at home right now, so.
No, don't worry, it's perfect.
But the last day of my summer holiday, so.
No, it's okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So based on that creativity and digital design definition, what would you tell us about the advantages and the disadvantages that these aspects bring to the companies and in general terms to the society?
So I can't really speak to the disadvantages of creativity or design, but I can speak to the advantages of it. So I think there's a risk in this age fueled by hype and excitement around technology. There's a risk that you forget about the human and people's needs and the context in which they live and so on. So that's why you need design at the table. And often in companies, design and creativity is not necessarily at the table. You might have business at the table, as in a position of influence. You might have business represented there, money, organization, and so on. You might have technology represented, often digital solutions and so on represented. But still, quite often today, we're not considering strategically the needs and the context of humans in the overall picture. So that's super important, and it can be a huge competitive advantage if you have it. And you see it with many of our digital innovators. You see companies like Google and Amazon and so on are very, very people-centric. And there's lots of Latin American examples of the same. Very, very customer-centric. Think about customer value, convenience, and so on. If you don't have that, that will over time become a huge competitive disadvantage.
Okay. Yeah, many companies have been investing in new design, in new publicity based on people needs to squeeze basically their business. But what do you think that in this statement that people say that low cost and cheap design are always linked? Is it true? I mean, in your opinion?
So I think design comes in lots of different shapes and forms, and a very a very cheap, as in, a design solution that you didn't pay a lot of money for, can still be transformational if it's applied to the right thing. But typically there is a correlation between how much effort, how much time, how much money you put into design and the value that you get out at the other end. And there's a famous quote by Steve Jobs, and I won't get it completely right, but I'll get it ballpark right, that I'd like to repeat, which is that if you think that good design is expensive, then wait until you see the cost of bad design.
Okay.
Right. So the idea
will give you fantastic results. Like
and if you invest in bad design, or you don't invest in design, that will actually be very costly for your business, because no one will want your service, no one will want your product, it will not fit into people's lives, it will not be something that you're proud of.
And what would you say is the best advantage of reinventing oneself for a company, or even for us in our quotidian life?
Yeah, so I think that given that technology is now at a stage where it can enable us to do almost anything we can imagine. So, you go back to science fiction movies 10 or 20 years ago, and many of the things that they imagined back then are actually starting to materialize now around us. So we can do almost anything we can imagine, which is amazing. So that's pretty special. But given that technology has this incredible potential to transform and shape and evolve, companies and individuals need to change and evolve as well to stay with or stay ahead of where others are going and where technology is going. So it actually becomes a necessity for organizations and for people to reinvent themselves, evolve, and importantly, to learn. So that's where both learning every day and making sure you have a job where you learn and you evolve is really important. Ensuring that the organization learns in a systemic way and evolves and changes is super important. And that's also where that creativity comes into play, where it's very important to be able to take not just small and natural steps forward, but sometimes creative and sometimes lateral leaps. It's not always about nudging a little bit forward, but sometimes about jumping far ahead or jumping to a different place.
Okay. And you will be in Cartagena, but I would like to ask you, what would be like the best advantages, in particular for us in Latin America, for digital design? Many of the most innovative companies are not in this region, even if in this region we have some companies investing in good design and very good digital innovation and all this field. But for example, all these Scandinavian companies or even American companies as Google have been investing in this type of field. But what do you think would be the best advantage or the most radical change for a region like Latin America in this particular aspect?
Yeah, so the good news is that no country has a monopoly on creativity and design, for example. And I think Latin America is in many ways a design-friendly environment, and for example, very visual environment. And if you look at digital, what has happened to digital? Digital has become a much more visual medium over the years. So it used to be text-based, and then it became picture-based, and then it became about picture and video. And that's because people read and take in visual communication faster, but they also gravitate towards that. We're by default very visual people, and Latin American cultures tend to be visual cultures. The picture behind you right now is very, very visual. It's very strong in color and so on. Mine is a bit boring and bland because I haven't decorated my room yet, so apologies for that. But that is one aspect, the visual creativity from Latin America. and then I think innovating within the context of the culture is really important as well. So what works in America, some of those things will work brilliantly in Latin America, but other things will not. So, for example, the retail experience, the payment experience, and so on will vary from country to country in terms of what works and what doesn't work, and what's good and what's not.
Yeah, based on local necessities.
Correct. So no country has a monopoly on innovation either. So what might be a little bit harder is figuring out the sort of infrastructure in terms of funding for good ideas and funding for creativity, where on the West Coast, in the Valley, in America, there's been a long-standing tradition of often quite lucrative funding of people with ideas and that bring good ideas and technology together, or good ideas and design and technology together.
That is so better.
Yeah, and also in the Nordics increasingly, and in Germany, for example, there's a better sort of ecosystem for funding startups and digital and technology startups. So figuring out how can Latin America come together to create those centers where there's a fertile ground for good ideas to grow will be important.
Cool. And I mean, to finish, I would like to ask you, will be this time your first time in Colombia?
Yes, it will be my first time in Colombia, and very, very much looking forward to it, and to visit Cartagena as well.
Cartagena is a beautiful city. So, Olof, thank you very, very much for your time. I really hope you have a great time in Cartagena. So have a nice day. Thank you very much for your time.
Likewise. Thanks a lot.